Picture yourself at a small wooden train station in northern Japan. No announcement, no crowd, no vending machine humming in the corner. All you hear is wind through cedar trees and a single track fading into the mountains. Minutes later, an old two-car train arrives, pauses briefly, then disappears. Silence returns. Now, shift your imagination to Shirakawa-go, a mountain village in Gifu Prefecture. Here, an elderly woman walks down a snow-covered road. She pauses to clear snow from the path in front of a farmhouse that has stood for 300 years. The roof is thatched. The walls are dark with age. Inside, a fire is already burning. Let's change the setting again. It is 4 in the morning in Ine, a small fishing village on the Kyoto coast. The harbor is barely visible through the morning fog. A fisherman named Kenji pushes his boat away from the wooden boathouse built over the water. He has done this for 30 years, following his father's routine. The sea does not wait for conversation. Now think about Aogashima, a tiny volcanic island in the Philippine Sea, so remote that the only way to reach it is by helicopter or a boat that cannot always dock because the waves are too dangerous. Only about 160 people live there. At night, the island has no streetlights. The darkness is complete. The stars are extraordinary. In Nagoro, a mountain village in Shikoku, Tsukimi Ayano has filled bus stops, fields, and school benches with life-size dolls, reminders of those who left and never returned. Finally, we arrive at Yonaguni, Japan's westernmost island, closer to Taiwan than to mainland Japan. Here, local traditions belong to a world most Japanese people have never seen. These places are not on the posters. They are not in the travel advertisements. They are not the Japan that most people think of. Yet behind neon lights and bullet trains, another Japan persists. Quieter, older, slower, and often more revealing. This quieter Japan faces unique challenges. It is a country that lost more than 3 million people between 2020 and 2025. Over 9 million homes now stand completely empty. Some islands went an entire year without a single child being born. Still, this is not a story about numbers. It's about what those numbers represent. Rather, it is a story about the fisherman who still leaves before dawn, the grandmother who still tends her mountain farmhouse, the island elder who remembers when the harbor was full, and the families holding on, not because they have no choice, but because these places are home. On this journey, we will go beyond the cities, into mountain valleys, buried in snow, along forgotten fishing coasts, across distant Pacific islands, and into villages so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. Because to truly understand Japan, you have to see the places most people never do. To understand why Japan's remote villages exist, you must first look at a map, but not the map of cities and railway lines. Instead, consider the map that shows the mountains. Nearly 73% of Japan is mountainous. Flat land is scarce. Cities grew where terrain allowed. Beyond that, communities were isolated. Stand in Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island, and this becomes immediately clear. Hokkaido is larger than Ireland, but most of its interior is dense forest, volcanic peaks, and river valleys that freeze solid for months every winter. The mountain settlements here were remote in every practical sense. Days of travel from the nearest town, cut off by snowfall for weeks, dependent entirely on what the surrounding land could provide. The settlers who built lives in these valleys developed their own ways of doing almost everything. Geography did not just separate these communities from the outside world, it shaped them from the inside. Travel south to the Kiso Valley in Nagano Prefecture, and the same pattern repeats. Running between the Central Alps and the Kiso Mountains, the valley's communities were sealed off from the outside world by the surrounding peaks for centuries. Villages like Tsumago and Magome developed their own foods, customs, and identity, simply because the mountains made outside contact difficult. Go further, to the Iya Valley in Shikoku, so deeply hidden in the mountain gorges, it became a refuge for defeated samurai clans during Japan's Civil War periods. The culture built there in isolation survived for centuries because the mountains made it nearly impossible for anyone to find them. Then there are the islands. Japan's archipelago contains 6,852 islands. Of those, only 421 are inhabited. Each developed its own rhythm at a pace entirely separate from the mainland. The Oki Islands, in the Sea of Japan off Shiman Prefecture, are a striking example. Historically used as a place of exile for emperors who had fallen from power, chosen precisely because the crossing was so difficult, the communities that formed on Oki developed their own Shinto rituals, their own festivals, and a relationship with the sea so embedded that even today the fishing calendar matters more than the national one. An elderly fisherman on Oki named Hiroshi described his daily life to a journalist in a single sentence. "The sea tells me when to go out. Not a clock, not a schedule, the sea." That sentence captures something essential about all of remote Japan. These places were not simply communities that failed to become cities. They were places where the land, the sea, the mountains, and the seasons became the organizing force of life, producing ways of living entirely different from anything that grew up in the flatlands where Japan's great cities eventually emerged. The neon lights came much later. The mountain villages came first. It is 6 in the morning in Shirakawa-go, and Yoshiko has already been awake for an hour. She is 71 years old. She lives alone in a Gashozukurai farmhouse her family has owned for more than 200 years. The thatch roof is nearly a meter thick. The walls are heavy timber. Outside, snow has been falling since midnight, and the drifts against the front of the house are already higher than her waist. Before breakfast, before the fire, before morning tea, Yoshiko goes outside and begins to clear the path. This is not optional. This is survival. In some winters, Shirakawa-go receives more than 4 meters of snow. The famous triangular farmhouse roofs, angled at 60 degrees so heavy, snow slides away before it collapses the structure, are the most important pieces of engineering in the village. UNESCO recognized Shirakawa-go as a World Heritage Site in 1995, not simply because it is beautiful, but because those farmhouses represent one of the finest examples of human adaptation to an extreme environment ever documented in Japan. The steep roof sheds snow. The thick thatch insulates against cold. Beauty in Shirakawa-go was always a byproduct of function. But Yoshiko does not think about any of this. She just clears the path. Travel 30 kilometers north to Ainokura, a smaller settlement in Toyama Prefecture, and the experience grows more concentrated. Ainokura has only about 9 households. In deep winter, the village shrinks inward. Firewood is shared. Neighbors check on neighbors. An older man named Takeshi, who has lived in Ainokura his entire life, says that winter is the season when he feels most connected to the people around him. In summer, people go their separate ways, he said. In winter, we come back together. Further north, Tokomachi in Niigata Prefecture holds the record for the heaviest snowfall ever measured in a populated area of Japan. In the winter of 1945, drifts reached nearly 4 meters in a single storm. Even today, with modern snow removal equipment, the city holds an annual snow festival. Because when the snow is that constant and relentless, the only response is to make it a celebration. In the surrounding villages of Tsunan, farmers still follow a planting calendar built entirely around the snow. Nothing goes into the ground before the snow retreats. Everything is harvested before it returns. A farmer named Noriko, 74 years old and still working her field with her daughter-in-law, put it simply, "The snow is not our enemy. The snow is on our schedule." In these mountain villages, winter did not make life impossible. It made life precise. The alarm in Kenji's house goes off at 3:30 in the morning. He does not need it. He was already awake. Kenji is 58 years old and has been fishing out of Ine on the northern coast of Kyoto Prefecture since he was 19. Ine is unlike almost any other fishing village in Japan. Its 200-odd wooden boathouses, called funaya, are built directly over the water, with the lower level as a garage for fishing boats and the upper level as the family home. From the water, the village looks as if it has grown directly out of the sea. Before 4 in the morning, Kenji's boat is already moving through the still water of Ine Bay. In winter, he targets yellowtail. In summer, squid. In autumn, the waters around the Tango Peninsula produce some of the finest crab in Japan. The season tells him everything he needs to know. Today, just over 200 people live permanently in Ine, down from nearly 500 in the 1980s. The younger residents have mostly moved to Kyoto or Osaka. Kenji has no intention of leaving. "Where would I go?" he says. "This is the only ocean I know." Travel along the coast to Kesanuma, a fishing city in Miyagi Prefecture, and the story takes a heavier tone. Kesunuma was devastated by the tsunami following the 2011 earthquake, an event that destroyed much of the harbor and forced thousands to relocate permanently. More than a decade later, the rebuilt city still carries that weight. The harbor functions. The fishing boats go out. But the population continues to decline, and processing plants need workers they cannot find because young people are not returning. A harbor worker named Satoshi, who stayed through the rebuilding, describes working in Kesunuma today as rebuilding something that keeps getting smaller. West along the Sea of Japan, Himi in Toyama Prefecture tells a different story. Himi is famous for its winter yellowtail, called kanaburi, sold at premium prices in restaurants across Japan. On winter mornings, the fish market opens before sunrise. Buyers examine the catch with focused, expert attention. Prices are settled quickly. By the time most of the country is waking up, Himi's morning business is already done. But even here, the pressure shows. The average age of Himi's fishermen has been rising for 2 decades. The city now recruits young people from outside, offering training and subsidized housing, because the generation that built its reputation is aging faster than it can be replaced. Up in Hokkaido, the Shikotan Peninsula juts into the Sea of Japan like a blade, a rugged coastline producing some of Japan's most prized sea urchin for centuries. The fishermen of Shikotan work to strict self-imposed quotas, diving into cold water to hand-harvest urchins. A diver named Masato, in his early 40s and one of the youngest still active in Shikotan, describes the October water as almost unbearably cold. He dives anyway, because the sea urchin of Shikotan, when fresh, is unlike anything sold anywhere else. Along all of Japan's remote coastlines, this pattern repeats. The ocean provides, the ocean demands, and the communities built around it endure, not because the work is easy, but because the identity that comes with it cannot be found anywhere else. Stand on the edge of Aogashima at sunset, and you will understand immediately why this island feels like a different planet. Aogashima is a small volcanic island in the Philippine Sea, about 358 kilometers south of Tokyo. Shaped like a bowl, the outer rim of an ancient caldera, with a second smaller volcano rising from the center, the entire island is roughly 9 square kilometers. About 160 people live here. No convenience store, no traffic light, no hospital. You either fly by helicopter, a service frequently cancelled due to wind, or take a boat from Hachijojima, a journey the rough seas make impossible for about half the year. The island has a single general store. When the supply boat cannot dock, the shelves stay empty until the sea calms. An elderly resident named Fumiko has lived on Aogashima her entire life. She has visited the mainland only twice. When asked if she ever felt isolated, she paused for a long time. Isolated from what? She said finally, "Everything I need is here." That answer is not uncommon on Japan's distant islands, but it sits alongside a harder reality. The population has been declining for decades. Young people who leave for school rarely return. When a child is born on Aogashima, the whole community celebrates, because it does not happen often. Sail southwest into the Okinawan archipelago, and the distances carry a different kind of weight. Yonaguni is Japan's westernmost island, so far west that on a clear day you can sometimes see the mountains of Taiwan just 111 kilometers away, with its own local language elements and fishing traditions rooted in Ryukyuan culture. Yonaguni feels less like a prefecture and more like its own separate world. For the approximately 1,700 people who live here, daily life is shaped by the ferry schedule, the weather, and the fishing season, not by anything happening in Tokyo. Further south, Hataruma is Japan's southernmost inhabited island. Its population of fewer than 500 people produces some of the country's finest brown sugar and lives beneath a night sky so undimmed by light pollution that the island built its own small observatory. An elderly woman named Shizuko, who runs a guest house on Hataruma, tells every visitor the same thing. Look up on the first night. After that, you will understand why we stay. Takatomi sits just 6 kilometers from Ishigaki, a 15-minute ferry ride, but culturally it inhabits a completely different world. Its residents have maintained strict community guidelines for generations. No buildings taller than 1 story, no modern materials, no changes to the white sand paths or coral wall houses. Every rooftop carries a pair of shisa, the traditional Okinawan lion dog guardians. The caretaker of Takatomi's main shrine, a man in his late 60s named Seijin, says the island's appearance is not aesthetic, it is memory. If we change the houses, he says, we change who we are. Then there is Tonaki, a small Okinawan island that in 2023 recorded 0 births for the entire year. Not a single child was born. The population is now almost entirely elderly. The school is technically still open, but the teachers there have almost no students. In 2023, 8 municipalities across Okinawa Prefecture recorded fewer than 10 births. Researchers now estimate that some of the smallest inhabited islands could lose their final permanent residents within 20 to 30 years. These islands developed their identities over centuries, their languages, food traditions, festivals, and spiritual practices, all shaped by the ocean around them. And now, that same ocean-shaped isolation has become the very thing making it hardest for younger generations to stay. There is a school in Nagoro, a village tucked into the mountains of Tokushima Prefecture in Shikoku. The desks are full. Children sit at their seats, hands folded, looking toward the blackboard. A teacher stands at the front of the room, but none of them are real. They are life-size dolls, handmade by a woman named Tsukimi Ayano, who began creating them to replace the people who had left. When a neighbor moved away, she made a doll for their doorway. When the school closed because there were no more children, she filled the empty seats with dolls in school uniforms. When the old men who used to gather at the roadside stopped appearing, she placed fabric figures at their usual spots. Nagoro now has more dolls than living residents. Its population has fallen to around 20 to 30 people, most of them elderly. Tsukimi says the same thing every time journalists arrive to photograph her work. The dolls are not art. They are grief made visible. Move north to Nanmoku, a mountain village in Gunma Prefecture, and the numbers tell a similarly stark story. By the mid-2020s, approximately 67% of Nanmoku's residents were over 65. Local officials have tried everything: subsidized housing, financial incentives for remote workers, relocation support for young families. Some of these efforts have brought a trickle of new arrivals, but the overall trend has not reversed. Walk through Nanmoku's streets and you see what population decline actually looks like. Curtains that have been drawn for years, gardens once tended with care, now overgrown. A community center that holds fewer events each year because there are fewer people to attend. The Japanese term for abandoned homes is akiya. Across Japan, there are now an estimated 9 million of them. Not ruins, just closed houses, left standing with their contents still inside, waiting for owners who are never coming back. Yubari in Hokkaido was once a thriving coal city with over 100,000 residents. When the mines closed, the population did not gradually decline. It crashed. By the mid-2020s, fewer than 7,000 people remained. Entire neighborhoods became akiya districts, street after street of empty houses decaying through Hokkaido winters. A retired miner named Ichiro, who has lived in Yubari his entire life, describes walking through his old neighborhood as like walking through a dream where everything looks familiar but nothing is alive. He stays because the idea of Yubari becoming completely empty, of no one remaining to remember what it was, is a loss he cannot accept. Near Tokyo, in the mountains of western Okutama, the contrast is almost surreal. Close enough to the city that the metropolitan sprawl is visible from certain ridgelines. Yet Okutama's communities have been declining for decades. The town has tried repurposing akiya into guest houses, attracting remote workers, and promoting outdoor tourism. Some programs have had real success, but the underlying reality continues. Japan's 2025 national census, released in May 2026, confirmed what these communities had been experiencing for years. The country lost more than 3 million people in 5 years. Population declined in 45 of Japan's 47 prefectures. More than 1,500 municipalities shrank. But no statistic explains what it feels like to sit in a village where the people who gave it life are gradually disappearing, while the houses, the roads, the shrines, and the gardens remain standing long after those people are gone. What is left is not emptiness. It is presence without people, a landscape of memory. The streets of Takatomi are made of white sand, not paved, not cobbled, sand raked smooth each morning by residents who take turns maintaining the paths in front of their homes. The coral stone walls lining every alley are original, unchanged in design for generations. On each rooftop, a pair of shisa watches from the tiles. An artisan named Kana, who weaves traditional minsa fabric on Takatomi using techniques practiced on this island for centuries, describes her work as holding a conversation across time. The patterns carry meanings embedded in Ryukyuan culture for generations, given as gifts between couples, encoding particular blessings. She learned from her mother. Her mother learned from her grandmother. If I stop, Kana says, the conversation ends. Travel to the mountains of Fukushima Prefecture and the village of Uchijuku offers a different kind of survival story. Uchijuku is a former post town on the old mountain road between Aizu and Nikko. Its main street is lined with Edo period thatched roof buildings maintained not as a museum but as a living community. People still live in these buildings. Families still operate businesses from them. The village chose decades ago not to modernize its streetscape. No concrete, no modern signage, no power lines running down the main road. The result is a settlement that looks unchanged from 2 centuries ago, and a community that found in that preservation a genuine source of both pride and economic sustainability. In Tsumago, a post town in the Kizo Valley, the same philosophy has held for 50 years. Tsumago was among the first villages in Japan to collectively prohibit the demolition of traditional buildings and the installation of modern exterior elements, such as television antennas, vending machines, and visible utilities. The residents made this decision themselves in the 1970s, long before heritage tourism was a familiar concept. They did it because the town's history felt worth protecting. The shrine caretaker of Tsumago's main sanctuary, a man named Ryoichi, who has held the position for 30 years, says the most important part of his role is not the ceremonies, it is the stories. Every village needs someone who remembers what happened here, he says. If no one remembers, then the place is already gone, even if the buildings are still standing. In Gujo Hachiman, a castle town in Gifu Prefecture, the Gujo Odori Festival has been held every summer for more than 400 years. For 33 nights, between mid-July and September, the town dances. Not performers for tourists, everyone dances. Residents, shopkeepers, elderly residents, and children who have barely learned to walk. The dancing continues until 2 or 3 in the morning, on the most important nights. Families pass the steps to their children, the way other families might teach table manners. A festival organizer named Hiromi, who has been involved in planning the Gujo Odori since she was a teenager, says the festival is the clearest measure of the town's health. If people still come out and dance at midnight, she says, the town is still alive. Remote Japan did not preserve its traditions by accident. It preserved them because isolation gave those traditions time. Time to become part of daily life. Time to pass from one generation to the next. Time to become so woven into local identity that removing them would feel like removing the ground itself. Yuki was 34 when she left her apartment in Tokyo. She had worked in marketing for 8 years. Good salary, small flat in Shibuya, a social life that kept her busy every weekend. She was also, by her own account, exhausted, in a way that sleep did not fix. She moved to the Akita countryside, northern Tohoku, known for heavy snow, rice farming, and a pace of life almost incomprehensible to anyone who has lived only in cities. She had no farming experience and knew no one in Akita. She found a property through a rural migration support program and arrived in April, just as the snow was finally retreating from the fields. The first months were hard. The silence was unfamiliar. The community took time to accept her. But by her second winter, something had shifted. She describes it as becoming fluent in a different kind of time. In Tokyo, I was always aware of what I wasn't doing yet, she says. In Akita, I became aware of what was actually happening right in front of me. Yuki is one of a growing number of people who have left Japan's major cities for rural communities. Japan's government, recognizing the urgency, launched a regional migration program offering financial incentives, including subsidies of up to 1 million yen per child for families willing to relocate from central Tokyo to smaller municipalities. In the villages of Niigata, some of the country's most productive rice-growing areas, young farmers have arrived through agricultural apprenticeship programs, spending their first years working alongside veteran farmers who hold knowledge that cannot be found in any textbook. A farmer named Keizo, in his late 70s and still working his fields every morning, took on an apprentice, Daisuke, 5 years ago. He knew more than I did about chemistry, Keizo says, but he didn't know yet when to listen to the field. In rural Nagano, a couple named Sota and Mei left careers in Osaka's financial sector in their early 30s and now run a guest house in a restored farmhouse near Matsumoto. They grow much of their own vegetables, source everything else locally, and host no more than 4 guests at a time. We are not selling Japan, Sota says. We are sharing a place where we actually live. That is completely different. In rural Shimane, on the Sea of Japan coast, remote workers have begun settling in quieter villages, drawn by low costs, natural surroundings, and a quality of daily life increasingly rare in Japan's cities. Some have brought young families. A few have become so embedded that they now sit on local planning committees and volunteer at festivals they first encountered as newcomers. These arrivals do not solve the broader demographic challenge. The numbers are still small, but they represent something real, a growing recognition that the life available in remote Japan is not a consolation prize. It is something people are beginning to choose. We began this journey in Shirakawa-go, standing outside a farmhouse that has survived 300 years of mountain winters. We walked the harbor road of Ine before sunrise, watching a fisherman's boat disappear into the fog. We looked down from the rim of Aogashima's volcanic caldera at a community of 160 people, surrounded by open ocean. We stood in the streets of Nanmoku and counted the houses with permanently closed curtains. We ran our hands along the white sand paths of Takatomi. and listened to a weaver explain what it means to hold a conversation across time. Each place revealed something different. In Shirakawa-go, we saw how ingenuity shaped by necessity can produce something that outlasts the civilization that created it. In Ine, we saw how an entire identity forms around the daily rhythm of the sea, and how difficult it is to replace once the people who carried it begin to leave. In Aogashima, we understood that isolation is not simply deprivation. In Nanmoku, we saw the physical remains of lives fully lived. In Takatomi, we saw that preservation is always an act of will. Now consider what connects them all. Japan is a country of 123 million people. Nearly 37 million live in Greater Tokyo alone. Seen from this angle, the remote villages, fishing towns, and distant islands seem like footnotes. Small and shrinking, peripheral to the story of a modern nation. But that reading is precisely backward. The Japan the world admires, its precision, its deep relationship with seasons and silence and craft, did not emerge from skyscrapers and high-speed trains. It came from mountain villages, where winter forced communities inward. From fishing towns, where the ocean demanded patience. From islands where isolation produced cultures that had nowhere to go but deeper into themselves. The cities are recent, the villages are ancient. The character that makes Japanese culture distinctive worldwide was shaped over centuries in places like Shirakawa-go, Ine, and Takatomi, not in Tokyo's offices. This is why the disappearance of these communities matters beyond sadness or nostalgia. When a village in the mountains of Shikoku loses its last family, something irreplaceable is lost. The knowledge held by the people who lived there, the specific relationship between those people and that landscape, the traditions that belong to that community and not to any other. Japan's 2025 census confirmed a decline of more than 3 million people over 5 years. The fertility rate has fallen to approximately 1.1. The median age is 49.8, the highest of any major nation on Earth. These numbers describe one of the most significant demographic shifts in modern history. But the remote villages are where that shift is most visible and where it becomes most clear what is truly at stake. Not just population, identity, memory. The slow accumulated knowledge of how to live in specific places, in specific ways that took centuries to build, and that the modern world has not yet found a way to replace. Think back to the image of Tsukimi Ayano's dolls filling the empty school in Nagoro. The desks are full. The classroom, at first glance, appears to be in session, but the figure's stillness reveals the truth. The children are gone. What remains is a woman's attempt to make absence visible, to ensure that whoever passes through understands what was here before they arrived. On May 29th, 2026, Japan released the results of its 2025 national census. The country had lost more than 3 million people in 5 years. 9 million homes now stand empty. On some remote islands, entire years passed without a single birth. But the census cannot measure what Fumiko on Aogashima means when she says, "Everything I need is here." It cannot measure the precision of Yoshiko's morning snow clearing in Shirakawa-go, the muscle memory of generations in a single daily act. It cannot measure what it costs Kenji to be perhaps the last generation of fishermen to launch from Ine's Funaya before dawn. These are not stories about decline, though decline is part of them. They are stories about how human beings adapt to extraordinary places, how communities form identities that outlast the circumstances that created them, how isolation, which the rest of the world tends to see as a disadvantage, can become, over centuries, the source of everything that makes a place irreplaceable. The mountain settlements, the fishing harbors, the volcanic islands, the snow-buried valleys, these are not the background of Japan's story. They are its foundation. Far from the neon lights and crowded platforms, Japan becomes quieter, older, slower, and in those quiet places, in the creak of a centuries-old farmhouse floor, in the sound of a fishing boat leaving the harbor before dawn, in the midnight dancing at Gujo Hachiman, in the fabric that Kana weaves in Takatomi with her mother's hands. Japan reveals something no city, however spectacular, can fully show: its soul. The question this journey leaves behind is not whether these villages can survive. The question is whether the rest of Japan and the world, watching from the outside, will notice what is disappearing before it is completely gone. Far from the neon lights and crowded stations, Japan becomes quieter, older, and slower. The snow still falls on Shirakawa-go. The boats still leave Ine before sunrise. The white sand paths of Takatomi are still raked smooth every morning. The dolls of Nagoro still sit in the empty school, watching the road for children who do not come. These places are not relics. They are living reminders that Japan has always been more than one thing, that behind the image of speed and modernity lies a deeper country, shaped by mountains and oceans and seasons and the long, patient work of communities that learned to survive together. If this journey changed the way you see Japan, subscribe and join us for more stories from the world's hidden places. And tell us in the comments, if you had the chance to spend 1 month in one of Japan's remote villages, which place would you choose? And which moment from this journey stayed with you the most?